Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry we're in of writing and publishing. And today we're absolutely delighted to have a very special guest, a first-time author whose book recently came out. He is Mr. Marc Perlman, who is a New Yorker, an attorney, and an author. Marc, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're delighted to have you and can't wait to chat. But before we do, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing well, thank you, Roland, and thanks for joining us, Marc. Yeah, listen, I'm excited to talk about this because, what we want to talk today about is the idea of, the setting of your book and what you can do with it other than, some people, they write the book and it's just the setting is almost an afterthought. It's not really, part of the story unless it's very central, obviously, to sort of a science fiction world or something like that. But, you can do more than, have it the central part of your story only in those kind of circumstances. Like, you build atmosphere and tension and meaning through the settings that you choose, and it can almost be like another character in your book. And this is the kind of thing that we're talking about today. So why don't you tell us a bit about your own books and sort of like why setting is important in your opinion, and we'll just go from there.
Sure. Well, you said my books. I have one book so far, and if I write any further books, it might change. But certainly with this book, there's a forest in this book, and that became, as you say, a character, and obviously not a walking, talking character, but it became this sort of presence in the book. And I can't say I started out writing with that intent. It sort of developed more organically based on the way I was formulating the plot, and also, I think, the way I imagined the book as I was going along. But I initially had the inspiration for this book while I was actually in the location. I was in this forest. It's called the Białowieża Forest in Poland, and it's the Belarus Forest in Belarus. It's right on the border, which makes it very interesting, to me at least. And when I was there, I thought, this is really cool. I'd been thinking of writing a novel at that point. I wasn't sure what it would be, but I said, this has to be in a book. This is such an interesting place. It would be a great scene in a book, and a defining scene. So I sort of started from there. I was on this vacation and I was in this forest. And from then on, during this vacation, I started outlining this book in my head and the people I met, the places I went. But this forest was certainly central. And when I finally when I sat down to actually write this novel when I got home, I wanted there to be this big reveal in this forest. But to have a big reveal, you need to create the tension, create the mystery. And from there, when I was outlining the plot, I started dropping these little breadcrumbs, these little episodes in the forest prior to the big scene. And in that way, I realized I was developing a forest as you say, a character, where it took on this sort of life of its own. And I could have set the book in a warm July day with the sun shining down, but I went for late November, and it's moody and cold, and there's people with guns. So the forest in that way developed to a central figure in its own right, along with the main characters.
Yeah, people talk about when they set a book in Manhattan or whatever, they'll be like the living, breathing city, right? Like they anthropomorphize a setting as a character, right? And because it's not just the background. It can be, in some books it is, obviously, but in some cases, it's so central to the story, even, and what happens in the story. But like, if you took your story, whatever happens, and you put it in a different space, it would not have worked because it's so central to it.
Yeah, I think, and as I said, to me, it was a very unique location. And I can give you a little bit of the background. As I went on this heritage trip to see where my great-grandparents were from. I learned at an early age that they weren't from the United States, and was amazed. They were from Belarus. I couldn't just take off and head to Belarus at the age of 5 or 6. So years later, this is 2011, I finally had the time and the ability to go see these places. So I booked this trip, but I didn't want it to just be go and see 4 relatively dilapidated villages in Belarus. So I went to Poland, I went to Lithuania as well. And when I was looking at what to do, I saw that there's this forest right on the border. And it was called the last primeval forest in Europe, which to me conjured up images of Grimm's fairy tale, gnarled oak trees, and Little Red Riding Hood walking through.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite like that, but it also, the fact that it's right on the border between NATO and democracy and Belarus, which was called the last dictatorship in Europe. I think now there's it has a runner-up with Russia there. But it just seemed too interesting, so I went to this forest, and I also wanted to see they have European bison there, which I didn't even know that existed outside of.
I didn't even know that was a thing, and I'm from Europe.
They're not in England, but in Eastern Europe they have bison. They're very difficult to see in the wild. I saw them in captivity, but it sounded fascinating. So I went there. I took a walking tour of the Polish side of the forest one day, and then I rented a bike and I rode across the border. So I rode down this little forest road. I got to a border post. I got stamped out of Poland, stamped into Belarus. And I got to the actual border fence, and I waited a few minutes for some soldier in camo to come over. He had a gun on an AK-47 on his back. He was bouncing a little rubber ball, I remember. And he unlocked the padlock and let me into this other country. And I went for a bike ride, and it just seemed too cool to not write an espionage book about it, or a sort of espionage book about it. And so that's where it really started. I think not only is the forest fascinating, but borders are interesting as well. So
do you refer to the forest as that forest, or do you sort of not really name it?
No, I call it the Białowieża Belarus forest. Again, okay, my pronunciation was off. I apologize, but no, I use those forests, and and it's in that sense, it's based in reality. I'm working a lot from memory in the book, a lot from photos, but also I romanticize it as well. So I do rely on some artistic license there.
Still, I mean, I think that's one of the beauties of writing about a real place. You know, you might embellish a bit, but it sort of introduces your readers to a part of the world that they either didn't know existed in the first place, or they never thought they'll ever go to, and maybe you'll spark their imagination. Maybe they'll want to take a pilgrimage out to that forest.
I wouldn't recommend Belarus at the moment, but maybe the Polish side, yes.
At some point, yeah. So what did you do with the forest to sort of turn it into this almost part of the character of the book? Like what sort of techniques did you use for that?
Well, I as I said earlier, I wanted there to be this big reveal. So I guess this is going to will be spoilers in this, but I thought this is the perfect place. This dark forest is the perfect place for something to be hidden, and that's how I slowly built the mystery of something is going on there. What is it? So the main character, Jack Miller, and the readers are slowly introduced to it. And in very small increments, like the first time he goes into the forest, he just jumps across the border looking for a soccer ball and stumbles upon something. Maybe he's 5 minutes in the forest. The next time he goes for this bike ride, which is modeled after my own bike ride, but it's a lot more, my bike ride I didn't get stuck on the other side of the border and put in prison. He does. So in increments, I build the mystery. And then finally, so I'm leaving these little breadcrumbs of mystery. And finally, there's the scene, which I had initially imagined, where he goes back with his new, with his Belarusian guide, the beautiful Anna, who he's falling for. And he beyond his better judgment, follows her on this reckless mission back to the forest. And that's where they discover Russian soldiers, Russian missiles. And it's obviously a windy, rainy night, and everything goes awry at that point.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I like when authors go to the places, to do that firsthand research, which isn't always possible, of course. I mean, And I guess these days it's probably easier than ever to not go there. It is enough, written about places and videos and pictures that you could do it, but you get something much deeper by actually going yourself and experiencing a place, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I did, for certain parts of my book, I relied on Google Maps, where you could zoom in and get street views. Not so much in Belarus, but other places. But certainly having been in the forest and experiencing I noticed when I was there that it seemed like the trees were different on the different sides of the border. And I think that does make a difference and gives some authenticity. And it's not just with the forest. Throughout the book, I write about Minsk, and my experience there, I think, informed my experience in Belarus. I'm just noticing, one of the details I put in is the people just don't smile at other people. And to me, that's a little strange, where in New York and other places in the US, people, if you smile at someone, you might get a smile back, but it just was this very different atmosphere. And I suspect it comes from maybe years of living under autocratic regime, where there might be this fear there. So I think it does help to experience, even if only for a few days, some of these locations. I think that does add some authenticity.
Well, I think one of the things about I just wrote an article about this is capturing the vibes of it. And if you go somewhere and experience it, you get the vibes that you can't get from Google Maps. And it seems like, you got the trees are different, people didn't smile. There's so many details and atmospheric things that you wouldn't have got unless you'd actually been there.
I would say that there certainly are elements that I've incorporated. So I do think it was very helpful to be there. I would also say, though, that in my memory, a lot of this, as I said, was based on memory and photographs of my trip. But I started this in 2011. I got home from my trip in 2011, November of 2011, started writing, got maybe 30 pages in. I had a few large scenes in my head that were like movies in my head, but I had trouble creating that connective tissue to really bring these big scenes together. And then I hit sort of a writer's block, or maybe not a writer's block, but an outlining block, because I realized I couldn't just wing it. I needed an outline. And so it took me 10 years to finally get back to it, and finally just not accept excuses and get the outline done and get writing. And once I got writing, it went pretty smoothly once I had that outline done. But in those 10 years, I did think a lot about the book. So sometimes I wonder how much my memory was true memory from my time there, and how much was my writer's memory, my artistic memory, which may have embellished certain things. And some of that might be unclear, and some of that might be in the book, though I do think there is certainly a basis in reality to much of what I have there.
And I think Hemingway said something about, when you write, you're writing fiction, but in some ways the fiction can be more truthful than the truth.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, I'm often compared to Hemingway, So.
Well, there we go. So, yeah,
it's fictional, right? It's not. You're not writing, a guide to the forest, so it's okay to make some.
Yeah, and I did a lot of research on top of my time there. I was reading articles, I read books, and I read books about Belarus, about Russia, about Russian security services. There's not as many books on the Belarusian security services. I was reading about NATO. So I did a lot of research, but where the research ended, I realized I had to fill in the gaps with my own imagination. And I think that's the beauty of writing fiction. I had to accept that I'm not writing a dissertation on the topic. I'm trying to create a fun, interesting novel.
Which is the main thing. That's what a book should be. A book should always be an interesting read rather than necessarily anything else.
Yes. Yeah. And I know some authors take different approaches. Some really go for 100% authenticity. I was taking a different approach. I wanted it based in reality, but I was willing to accept deviations from that.
So I would love to know about, this is your first full-length novel, what your process was for putting it together. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I've heard that term. I am definitely a learned plotter, and that's why it took me 10 years to get this done. I started out, I suppose, as I said, winging it as a pantser, but I'm a lawyer by training. I'm a practicing lawyer, and I have, for the last 25 years, written everything to make sure there is no ambiguity whatsoever in what I am writing. And I realized I needed an outline. So when I finally, in March or February of 2021, when I said, no excuses, you're going to do this year, I spent a good 3 or 4 weeks just focusing on the outline. I mean, it was all consuming. I'd lie in bed at night and think about the outline and get up and take notes. And once that was down, the writing for me was really easy. Everything I had my outline was essentially a page of a calendar. Most of this takes place in a 2-week time frame. It was a page of a calendar, and I just filled in on any given day what's going on there. And the writing at that point was pretty easy. It was like the movie in my head just coming out my fingers onto my computer screen.
That's it's interesting to say about the ambiguity, because thrillers in particular, they can have very complex plots. But as somebody, I like to read thrillers a lot, and I don't like ambiguity either. I really like it when you read a thriller and you discover more information, and that at the end it's like all the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle come together, rather than there being questions or plot holes or anything like that. So it sounds like you've got the right attitude.
Yeah, I think it lends itself to this genre. If perhaps I was writing a deeper literary fiction where I'm trying to delve the depths of human emotion and answer the great questions in life, maybe it might be a different approach. But certainly with this, where I tried to take pieces of different authors and books that I really liked. And what I like is when you can take different storylines and slowly weave them together to create that tension and draw the tension out to a good resolution at the end. And that was my approach here. And I have to actually, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. You go ahead. You're much more interesting.
What helped me a lot with that is Ken Follett. I have read several of his books. I was reading Pillars of the Earth and some of the other Knightsbridge or Kingsbridge of the series. And many years ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I was on his website looking at what else he wrote. And he had a master class in how he writes, which I read. And to this day, I'm kicking myself for not having printed it out or saved it. But the essence of it, he's very deliberate. He said every page you need one small nugget of something that's unresolved. Every 3 pages, something a little bigger, and then every chapter you need a real doozy, a real cliffhanger. So he took a very deliberate approach to keep stringing the reader along, and I tried to incorporate that into my book, and I think it was somewhat successful. And there's actually in my book there's the scene where he's biking through the forest. I say that he's about to turn around. He knows the border is going to close at 4:30. He has to go back. He's been biking for about half an hour, but he sees that there's a bend in the road up ahead. And he decides to go. He wants to go check it out because there's a bend in the road. You want to see what's beyond there. So he goes beyond the bend and he sees something else that catches his interest. And he gets lost and he gets stuck in the forest. And I wrote that from my own experience. I'm an avid hiker and mountain climber. And in my life, when I'm doing that, if I see a bend in the path ahead, I always need to know it's there. If I'm approaching the top of the hill, I always need to get to the top of the hill. I can't just turn around. And once you get around the bend or you get to the top of the hill, invariably there's another bend ahead. There's another hill to climb. And that just keeps pulling you along. So I sort of see that similar to what Ken Follett had written, and I tried to incorporate in my book. Always leave a little bend in the road ahead, and that will hopefully keep the readers engaged.
That's one of the things I enjoy is describe it as like the potato chip thing, where you have at the end of every chapter it's like a potato chip, and like you have to have one more.
Yeah,
I like that analogy. Yeah,
ending on a cliffhanger. That's I like books that do that, pull me along. The problem with that is, like, I read before I go to sleep, and then I'm always like, okay, I'm just going to finish this chapter, and then something happened, and then I just got to read the next chapter. It just never ends. And eventually, I have to stop.
That was my goal for this book. So
yeah,
I'd like to think that it cost some people a sleepless night, but
exactly.
Sure.
The atmosphere. First of all, I wanted to say I like that idea of the calendar, especially in a story that is a fixed length of time, and sort of doing it that way, right? Because there's a lot of times you'll watch a movie, you read a book, whatever, and so much happens in a single day, or the time span, you're like, how much time has passed at this point? Like what's going on? Like, I like being able to track that. And for when you plot it that way, you can make sure that it all makes sense, that everything is doable, and the time limit doesn't get all messed up, and you're not missing things and saying, okay, this thing happened, and then you realize this, and then you write this other thing, and then you realize, but this was supposed to happen at the same time, but this happened like way later. When you do it on the calendar, I think it's way easier to keep track of that. I'm a plotter too, so I know what it's like to have to figure that stuff out ahead of time, for sure.
Yeah, it certainly helped. And in that way, as I was going, I could easily just refer back and say, oh, it's been 3 days since this happened.
Yeah.
There's no way that they can do this now. So yeah, to me, it was very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so with the atmosphere that you're creating, how else are you using sort of that as a big plot point, that really, you couldn't take that story and put it somewhere else without making, significant changes, because it was so integral to your plot, and your plot was so much of the story,
I think in part, it's just a forest lends itself to such atmosphere. Forest, and I think maybe culturally it does. I mean, there's a reason that forests in our culture created everything from the big bad wolf up until the Blair Witch. I mean, over centuries, forests have been they can be beautiful places where the sun shines down and the deer are smiling at you. But if you walk into a forest and you go far in, it's easy to, at least for me with an imagination, to feel like you're being followed or someone is hiding. That's traditionally where the outlaws would hide in the Middle Ages. And so I think naturally a forest is just the forest itself. I think people take their own experience of forest, and that lends it, the atmosphere develops from there as well. But I did work on, as I said, creating this moody forest. And the type where the deer are not smiling at you, but there are men with guns. And so I think, again, culturally, it's just something which can create tension. They're often, there's a feeling of an eeriness, an ominous nature to them, or it's easy to feel that way, or to be brought into that if you write it correctly. And this forest also, this location with being right on the border, I think that adds to it, because borders are tension. I find them fascinating, where depending on which side of this line you're on, whether it's a wall or a fence or just an invisible line in a field, depending on which side you are, the language changes, the government changes. And that's why so often in movies and books, you see people trying to get across the border, because it's moving from danger to safety, or the other direction, you're going into danger. And I think that adds a certain, that added to the atmosphere in this book, that it's not just a bunch of trees, but you're talking about this borderland.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like, you can have a forest and a clearing, and it's like middle of the day and the birds are chirping and the lights streaming in, but then you in that same forest walk for 5 minutes, and the overhead canopy blocks out all the light, and now you're in this dark forest at the same time of day, basically, and now the mood changes completely. And now what's behind that tree, what's around that bend, what's who's hiding, it sort of gives you those different things in the same sort of setting, right? And allows
certainly
creative. Yeah.
And from my own experience,
yeah,
where again, I am an avid hiker. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, but there have been times when I've just been in a cabin, and you go out into the woods at night, and it can be kind of, if your mind can play tricks on you, and it can create a bit of a sinister atmosphere, just listening to the sounds and being separated from civilization by a few hundred feet of forest.
Yeah, I think about most stories really, I think are setting second, story first, setting second. But I think that there are some that are sort of almost, they're built around that specific setting, and the whole story, sort of revolves around. I was thinking about the movie The Phone Booth, where the one guy was in the phone booth for the entire time he's on the phone with. It's been years since I saw it.
I remember the coming attraction, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it was the whole movie's in the phone booth, and it's like you build, but now so you have to think about that. It's like, what can we do with this one setting? And there was another one with Ryan Reynolds where he's buried alive, and he was like in a coffin for the whole movie. And you have to. It really adds a lot of thought. You have to put a lot of thought into it as an author to make that interesting. To say, okay, this is my setting for the whole book. What can I do with it? What are the constraints? What are the things I can expand upon? What could I do that people wouldn't even think in this one tiny little setting? You have a forest, so you have a lot more room to move, but that gives you other things that you can do. You can make it bright, you can make it dark, you can have hidden spots, you can have big open clearings. There's a lot of different things, and I think that's the important thing, is when somebody's writing a story and they're thinking about their setting, you have to think about, what can I do with this setting? What are the ways that that my character can take advantage of it? What are the ways that it's going to hamper them?
Yeah, and I guess we've been talking a lot about the forest, but we're also talking about atmosphere in general. And the book doesn't just take place there. Those are some of the defining scenes and sort of the inspiration for the book. But I think just Belarus in general, which is, I would say, an underwritten about country, although in the news these days you do see a little more about it. But it's this, I'd say, fairly stifling society. It's an autocratic government, and there's been a lot of unrest. There's, I think, a lot of fear. And it's dangerous to speak out against the government there, and it's been increasingly so. And it seemed like an interesting place to set this book, not only because I went there and had some experience with it, but so I could write some firsthand observations into the book. But I think that type of government creates a certain fear, and that's an atmosphere in itself. So it's not just that there's a lot of action in this moody forest, but that's also part of Belarus. And the main character, Jack, when he gets to Minsk and he sees the villages where his family's from, and he discovers a secret about his family there, which he'd been searching for. But he also went through his guide, the beautiful Anna, who he falls for. He starts to learn about the fear of living in one of these countries, these autocratic regimes. And he is pulled. She's a member of the underground, so he's pulled into that struggle, which really isn't his own, but he sort of adopts it. And that is more of the atmosphere for this story, is this stifling, fearful society.
I find that one of the things I think that makes your book especially timely and powerful is, to a certain extent, we as Americans who have normally been insulated against that kind of thing are witnessing certain things in our own government that perhaps we've only read about in fiction, and there are uncomfortable parallels that are quite powerful.
I would agree with that. I guess some people might not, but I would agree with that. I think that there have been changes in our own country. I don't think we're not quite at the Belarusian stage yet, thankfully. I think we're a long ways from there, but yeah, I think it's timely. The book is potentially timely in that respect, and I'd say also it's timely because of the Ukraine war, which threw me for a loop, because I finished my draft of the book in I think it was October of 21, and this is about, again, spoiler alert, Russia annexing Belarus. But then a few months later, Russia invaded Ukraine, and I had to make some quick adjustments to the book and figure out where to set it in time. Is it many years ago? Is it far in the future? To me, that was too speculative. So I set it right before the Ukraine invasion and wrap that in. So in that sense, I think the book is somewhat timely as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I feel like you have to be sort of tread carefully when you're writing about other countries, especially ones where they have sort of these kind of situations going on, because you don't want to. There's gonna be people that don't agree, that they're pro whatever the regime is. There's going to be people that are against it, and you have to sort of like be a little bit careful. You don't want to get facts wrong. If you're not from there, you have to make sure you get sort of like the main things right, because you don't want to all of a sudden annoy everybody who lives there or has come from there. And have you gotten any sort of feedback from people that know the area and say, hey, I
have not spoken to any Belarusians who have read it. I'm not sure any have, probably not those who live there, but those who live here, I haven't heard. I definitely was one-sided. I did not write favorably of the government there. I don't really name names in the book, but it's obvious. It's pretty clear what I'm writing about. But yeah, I could see in certain situations you might want to tread carefully, and I try to write from what I saw there and also what I've read in my research, without being too speculative. But I certainly write about, there's a prison scene. One of the characters goes to this famous prison in Belarus, and there was a book about what happens in that prison, and I thought this will really add to the descriptive atmosphere of what this country's like. And there were a lot of protests a few years ago after an election, and a lot of people were tortured. So I didn't tread that carefully on some of those topics. But I haven't spoken to it. It's possible I've alienated 50% of Belarus. But
that'd be great marketing. Banned in Belarus.
Yeah, would be. Yeah, no, I get that. And I think, as an author, you have to speak your truth, right? And everybody's truth is different, and that's fine. And I'm not saying, you want to change what you write because you're fearful of people. It doesn't matter what you write. Somebody's not going to like it, and somebody's going to like it. You can say things about the current situation in the US, and that's going to annoy half the people, or well, these days 30%. But you
and I wouldn't undertake that. And that, to me, that would be a hopeless task, and there's no winners there, at least for me as a writer.
No,
but I thought that this was maybe safer ground.
Yeah, and you're not trying to change people's mind. You're just setting the book, and you picked a place, and you're working within that. It's not necessarily that you're trying to like make a political point or anything like that. I think a lot of times people have to remember that when they read fiction, and be like, okay, this is just fiction. We're not making any points. But
I mean, I think
that's certainly ground in reality, but trying to create as I said, just a fun, interesting novel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, tell me about the character of Anna. How did you come up with her? Because to have a beautiful Belarusian guide, that's, you don't necessarily know one of those from your local coffee shop.
No, I did have a guide when I was there, 2 guides, and so I thought that would be a good character, a guide. But I also thought that for this book, it might be nice to have a love interest, so I made the guide beautiful. And Jack quickly is smitten, and things progress, but he also, and in part because of her beauty, in part because of what he discovers about his family, that changes his mind and or influences him to involve himself in these very dangerous activities and involve himself in the underground and go on these reckless missions and end up in the spy business of sorts. But I thought with a novel like this, you need a beautiful woman.
Yeah, I think as somebody who reads thrillers, I like that. I think that's an important part to put in. Like, it wouldn't be.
You're the James Bond guy, right? So you always believe that, right? Roland?
Yes, and I'm an old-fashioned romantic as well. You know, that's what is the point of going to have a life or death adventure in Eastern Europe if there isn't also a beautiful woman there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think my book is unique, but I also wasn't reinventing the mousetrap, and there are certain standards I thought I would stick to.
Well, I think that's important because people always say, you know, they want to read something new, but also something familiar. So that's kind of the challenge. Speaking about that, who are your inspirations in terms of authors you like, authors who might have inspired you to become a writer?
You know, it's different genres. In terms of the spy novel genre or the espionage genre, I'd say Daniel Silva is one of the best. I haven't read all of his books, but I've read enough to think that this can be a fun genre to write in. So I'd say he was inspiring to me in terms of choosing this genre to start with. As a writer, I like Alan First, and I really like Eric Ambler. Eric Ambler to me is like, well, Alan First has been writing, I guess, since the 90s or early 2000s, and he creates a really great atmosphere in pre-war Europe. If you pick up an Eric Ambler book, that is the atmosphere there is, he was writing in pre-war Europe. He was writing those books as a contemporary of that time, and those books are fantastic. And I like the fact that those are sort of this ordinary guy getting involved in extraordinary situations, which was what my book was like. And I'd also be remiss not to mention Erskine Childer's book, 1903 novel, The Riddle of the Sands, which I read probably 25 years ago.
That's iconic.
Which is about and that was the name, obviously, for my book was inspired by that, or as an homage, but that was about a young Englishman who goes on, I guess you would say, sailing holiday with a friend of his from through the Kiel Canal to the Frisian Islands off of Germany, and they start seeing strange things, people mapping the sand tables, and they discover that I recall it was Germans preparing for a cross-channel invasion. So to me, in the spy genre, those were the most those four, I'd say, were the most influential for me. But there are other authors who are just beautiful writers who I love. Mark Helprin, very different genre. Really rich, beautiful fiction. But I tried taking, as a first-time author, my last formal writing class was in junior year of high school. So it's been a while, but I just took authors who I liked, styles that I liked, and tried incorporating the components that I like. But you have to be careful because different styles don't necessarily work well together. So take what you can and try to create your own voice from it. I sort of liken it to, you could have a house where every room is beautiful. One room is Art Deco, one room is, I don't know, Edwardian, one room is Rococo. Every room is beautiful, but the house as a whole is kind of a mess. So if you're taking from different authors, you need to be careful to try to create something that actually works together.
Now, I was going to say, you did not publish this yourself. You're published through Kohler Books, is that right?
Kohler Books, yes.
Yes. How did that come about? Did you send off a pitch?
Yeah, I sent them. I sent them I guess a query letter and my manuscript, and a few weeks later I heard back and they were interested. So I was very happy about that.
And what's your experience with them been like?
Experience has been great. It was, I thought, a fairly seamless process. I mean, they set expectations up front. They say, as John Kohler says in his email, when you sign your agreement with him, he says, "Buckle up. This is going to be a rough ride." But it's pretty fast paced, and once it gets going and you start working with your editor, it moves pretty quickly. And I got to the point where I didn't want to look at the book ever again in my life. But no, it was they're very professional. The editing was good. I think the cover design was great, and I think I have a good product out of it.
Yeah, that was why I was asking, because the cover is excellent and it's very on brand. You know, speaking about James Bond, you know, cover has to be like James Bond going to the ambassador's dinner. Everybody wears a tuxedo, but James Bond is just that little bit sharper than everyone else's. And yeah, it's a cracking cover.
Thank you. Yeah, I was given a few options, and they have this they do a poll whenever a new author is going to publish. They have a cover poll where I think the 2 finalist covers are up for people to vote, and thankfully the one we have here was the winner. This was my far and away my favorite.
Oh, so it
creates a little bit of the atmosphere.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it creates the atmosphere that you talk about, where you have the trees and the darkness and the, yeah. It's good when you can tie that into the cover as well, because that's one of the main things that sells your book. People see that cover, that interests them, click, read your blurb, and that way you go.
Yeah, and actually, the book initially, the cover initially did not have these border posts or the fence, and I said, now it's a great cover, but it could just be a mystery. Yeah, let's put these border posts and that gives it a little more of an international espionage feel. So I think that added to it. But no, I was very happy with the cover. Hopefully, people are also happy with the text.
Well, absolutely. But I mean, a cover is very important because it's like an unspoken promise. And I think that was a really interesting thing you just said of adding the fence and the border posts, because, yeah, those are visual clues that someone who looks at the cover, they might not even verbalize it, but they're like, it gives them so much more context about what the book is about.
Yeah, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but I think we all do.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're approaching the top of the hour, so I was going to ask you: are you working on anything else? Are you got another book in the works?
I am not actively working on anything else. I have two other novels, very different genres, which I have been toying with. I've been taking notes on them, so I'm not actually writing them, but I every now and then I put a little more down in my 2 notebooks, and I'm trying to decide which one to progress with, because it's going to be a difficult choice. Whether one of them is sort of a low-tech science fiction novel, the other is more of a old New York fantasy novel, and I'm torn which one to. Because once I make a decision, then you have to be all in and spend a lot of time. So at some point, I have to make that tough choice and put one of them aside. But since Riddle the Trees just came out, a lot of my time has been spent on trying to promote that, and I'm looking forward to starting to write again.
Hopefully, it won't be another 10 years before that.
I'm hoping it's not another 10 years. I'm going for 9 on this one.
Yeah, it's every year. Every book should get a little bit better.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, can you let everyone know whether they're listening on Spotify, or watching on YouTube, where they can go to find out more about you as an author, where they can go to read your book, find your book, everything like that?
Sure. My website is marcsperlman.com, MarcsPerlman.com. And if they want to buy the book, they can go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org. I've seen it on pretty much every major online bookseller. So I think that obviously the majority of them are probably being sold on Amazon, but you can go anywhere.
Oh, you'd be surprised these days. They're branching out, I think. But that's fantastic. We will make sure to put a link to your website down in the description of this this episode. So if you're listening or you're watching, scroll down there and click on that and go and check out Marc's book and all about him. And while you're there, you will pass that big empty comment section. So make sure you leave Marc a comment and let him know how much you've enjoyed everything he has shared with us today. And maybe even your favorite spooky forest. I think mine would be upstate New York. It can get pretty creepy up there.
I don't have time there myself. I can.
Yeah, I could have. And also, there's that subscribe button if you haven't already. There is the like button. Give that a smash, as the kids say. And there is that bell icon. So click on that, and you'll get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked, which of course there will be next week. So until then, cheerio, and thank you very much, Marc.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.